of Rise TD, of course, as well for Dublin Southwest. Paul, your reaction to the publication of this report?
Well, the only clarity I think that's there for people is that the double standards persist. I mean, we should remind ourselves, because it seems like a long time ago now, that this was an event of 81 people, some of the great and the good from political lobbying and, in the case of Seamus Woolfe and another judge who was there, judicial life, at a time when the pre-existing rules said that no gatherings of bigger than 50, but the rules that had come into existence prior to this said no more than 6 people at indoor events. So it was, very blatantly and brazenly in breach of the rules. And you have a Supreme Court judge who was, in his former life as Attorney General, involved, as you said, in writing the regulations in terms of 50, participated in what was a blatant breach in a context of people missing out on weddings, not being able to attend funerals, people making huge sacrifices. And now it seems as if there will be no consequence whatsoever for Seamus Woolfe's breach of the rules.
That's not correct, in fairness. There are clearly consequences for Mr. Justice Woolfe. A report of this type into a judge is not quite unprecedented, but almost unprecedented. It's very uncommon for a judge to be essentially hauled across the coals the way Mr. Justice Woolfe has. It's not the case that there are no consequences. No matter what he does in the Supreme Court from now on, this is likely something that will follow him for the rest of his professional life.
The consequences, though, I suppose they pale in comparison to the consequences for some other people who attended the dinner.
I'm not sure that they do. I mean, unless, I presume Paul is suggesting that somehow a decision should be made that Mr. Justice Woolfe should resign or something like that. That is a significant consequence. And in fairness, I haven't read the report. I've only seen the summaries that are online. But my understanding is that Ms. Justice Denham looked at this matter. She is not uncritical of the judge, it must be said, but she has weighed up the consequences here, and she is a judge that it would be disproportionate to go down that road. She has made other recommendations that presumably will be followed up by the current Chief Justice, but it is not true to say that there are no consequences. It's certainly not true to say there are double standards. No investigation like this has been conducted into anyone else who was at that dinner. But again, Paul loves to put that kind of thing out there, and I suppose if you want to talk about double standards, there are members of his colleagues in the Dáil who regularly criticise judges when judges make decisions that they don't like. So if you want to talk about double standards, let's talk about that.
No, there's no double standards. People are free to criticise judges. We live in a democracy. We have freedom of speech. We're absolutely entitled to criticise judges. And right now, I'm criticising Seamus Woolfe for the behaviour he engaged in. There is no problem there in terms of separation of powers or anything else. And yes, I think that Seamus Woolfe absolutely should resign as a consequence of his behaviour. But what I think it remains the case, and I think has been highlighted further by the scandal around Michael Darcy, is that I think GolfGate gave a glimpse of the attitude by at least a section of the elite to rules, that they don't apply to them, they apply to other people, and to how power operates in Ireland, and how you have all these very powerful people, or some very powerful people and other slightly less powerful people, around tables after games of golf. I think people won't forget that easily at all.
Yeah, Barry, isn't that the problem, is that it wasn't so much any breaches of guidelines. We've all been guilty at different times of stepping over the mark over the last 6 months. That's only normal. But it's the impression that people were left with, that there was, one rule for them, one rule for us. And this re-emphasises that in people's minds.
Well, there isn't one rule for one and one rule for the others, but I understand that people are angry about that. They are rightly angry about it. The rules were put down, and as has already been said, so many different people suffered in terms of not being able to attend funerals of loved ones and family members, or being with their parents when they died. So this has been a lightning rod for all of that frustration, anger, anxiety, and rightly so. And that's why there is no suggestion for a moment that anybody thinks what happened in Galway was acceptable. Nobody's saying that. Mr. Justice Woolfe, in fact, was one of the first ones to come out and put his hand up and acknowledge that he did the wrong thing, and that he had acted inappropriately or in breach of the guidelines. Now, there's more about that in the report, but I'm not interested in kind of going through the details of whether he was or wasn't right or whatever, but nobody's suggesting that this was right. But that doesn't mean, in fact, that there is one rule. Because you said, Kieran, for example, everybody's breached the rules, and undoubtedly everybody has.
Yeah. But
because these people are in the public eye, it was very much reinforced to them. And as you said, many of them have suffered career setbacks, have had to resign from positions they've had. I'm not saying that isn't as it should be. But again, Paul suggests that this somehow indicates double standards when in fact it doesn't. And the other thing is, I'm not saying you can never criticise a judge. Of course you can.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about,
they get quite prickly about it though, don't they?
Well, actually they don't. And
they do.
Well, in fairness, Kieran, they are criticised fairly viciously on in broadcast media and in the press all the time. What's different is when a member of the Oireachtas, a member of the legislature, comes out and criticises judges personally because a decision was rendered against them that they're not happy with. That's a different thing.
Yeah. Paul, are you guilty of personal attacks as opposed to just criticising decisions?
No, not at all. And I think what Barry's referring to was Breed Smith's criticism of a decision that had nothing to do with her, but was to do with workers, and she was criticising the judgment and quoted from the judgment. And there's no problem with that.
She also criticised the judge personally, and she did so for political reasons.
People can go and read the transcript of what she said. But I think there are double standards here. I mean, if you read the, again, it's a summary of the report, that the kind of mitigating circumstances included the absence of relevant guidelines or a judicial code of conduct that, quote, could have helped him deal with the situation. I mean, people in general, it's part of the law, people are presumed to know the law. In this case, it's Supreme Court judge and a former Attorney General who was involved in writing the regulations. The idea that he needed some specific judicial code of conduct to tell him that he shouldn't be breaking the COVID rules, I think is, a bit unbelievable. I think it's clear that these rules should be applying to all, and in particular those in public life with prominent positions and so on should absolutely make sure that they're following them, as opposed to sending a message out that really these rules are there to be attempted to be avoided through things like partitions and so on.
I mean, Barry? Of course they should, which is exactly why Seamus Woolfe is being criticised for being there in breach of the regulations, and it's also why he came out and put his hands up immediately to say that he did. Nobody's defending what happened in Galway.
His account is kind of unbelievable though, isn't it?
No.
As in, Seamus Woolfe stated that during the dinner he was not aware of the event consisting of any diners other than those in the dining room that he could see, and he was not conscious of another room of diners in the hotel or any other room connected to the group. There was an accordion partition that wasn't pulled fully across the room, and there was a table plan that was printed online. People took photos of it and put it up. There was a table plan with all 80 diners on it at the entrance to the room. Did he literally have a pair of blinkers on?
No, well, I mean, as I said, I wasn't there, so I don't know all those details.
It's utterly unrealistic, that account.
Well, you see, this is exactly...
It suits him, but it's utterly unrealistic.
Kieran, you can confuse the difference between mitigation and excusing. What Miss Justice Denham has said is that there are mitigating factors. That means she is starting from the point that he has done wrong, and she's applying these in assessing what is the consequence for him. And what we're really talking about here is proportionality.
But that's his version of it, I mean, of events. And I didn't know there was anyone else except the people in my room.
And you'll also notice, for example, that she doesn't necessarily say she accepts all of that. What she's doing is applying a proportional test as to what is the right thing, what is within reasonable parameters as to how to react to this. And as I said, it is not consequence free for him. He'll be with this for the rest of his life, but it is not appropriate either to just throw people out because they've made a mistake.
Yeah, Paul, is his mistake so grave that it's deserving of losing his job?
In this case, yes, I think so. I think that's what's appropriate. I think that's what had to happen in terms of Phil Hogan. It's what had to happen in terms of Dara Leary, and it absolutely would be appropriate here. I mean, it's kind of Twilight Zone stuff, the idea that he's playing golf with presumably 100 people or so, and then some of them don't go to the dinner. Some of them have the kind of cop on not to go to the dinner. But then others, presumably he's aware he's chatting to, they say they're going to the dinner and then they disappear somehow. And they're presumably voices and speeches coming from the other part of the room that is supposedly partitioned off and that he doesn't know exists. It's not credible.
Dara Leary resigned as minister. You're saying he should also resign his Dáil seat, and any other member of the Oireachtas should also resign their Dáil seat, because if anybody in the Dáil or the Oireachtas makes a mistake, then they should resign from the Oireachtas. Is that what you're saying? Because it sounds awfully like that, and it's not as if you've never made mistakes yourself.
I'm saying that the reality, you can say there's consequences for Seamus Woolfe, but there aren't any consequences apart from the fact that people know he broke the rules. That's it. There are no other consequences, as far as I'm aware, from this. And I think that is utterly unacceptable and is a continuation of one rule for some and an absence of rule for one rule, a rule being applied to most, and for some people to get away with no rule being applied, because the truth is there is no consequence, as I understand it, outlined in this report here for him.
Well, Paul, I'm sure if I asked you, you'd say we should show a little empathy towards, students and others who've been partying in recent days. Why should we show empathy to them and not empathy to Seamus Woolfe?
Because I think there's a big difference between someone who's involved in creating the rules, writing the public health guidelines that he's supposed to be applying, and then flaunting them, and the kind of students that you're talking about. I'd encourage all of them, of course, to obey the guidelines, but I do think there is a difference.
Barry, why did Enda Kenny have the cop on to realise in advance that this was going to breach guidelines, and a judge in the Supreme Court didn't?
Well, look, I don't know. As I say, I wasn't there.
That's not my attempt to damn by faint praise. Enda Kenny's an intelligent man.
But I suppose the point is, Mr. Justice Woolfe has addressed this from the point of view of his perception of issues, but he's not saying that he didn't make a mistake. As I say, he's come out straight away and said that he made a mistake. It just suits Paul's narrative to suggest that there is this kind of division and that there aren't consequences for people, when that's simply not true.
All right, listen, Barry Ward, Fine Gael Senator, criminal barrister. Barry, thanks a million for coming into us. And on the line was Paul Murphy of Rise Dublin South West TD. Of course, a lot of people are getting in touch, having their say about this. The people, says Sid, who say Justice Woolfe did nothing wrong, are the same people who are foaming at the mouth when they see teenagers out and about. Peter in Thurles says, Kieran, how can there be consequences and outrage towards students in the Spanish arts? Spanish arch, not the Spanish arse, but a lame excuse. Let's Seamus Woolfe off the hook, says Peter in Thurles. Peter, apologies for butchering your text. And another listener says, GolfGate, I'm incensed with the Woolfe decision. The elitist judiciary and legal system in general has this country destroyed. Judges can't be sacked. A ridiculous state of affairs. This codology will ultimately result in revolution. Well, I'm not sure about that, but thank you for your text. 53106. Keep them coming into us here on The Hard Shoulder. Now,